Welcome to the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, helping you manage safety one episode at a time. With the constant regulatory and workplace culture challenges businesses face, we'll provide you with all the relevant information necessary to achieve a safer, more productive workplace. No management theories, platitudes, or guru speak, just actionable info you can use right away. Now here's your host, the Safety Pro himself, Blaine Hoffman.
Welcome to another episode of the Safety Pro Podcast. I will try not to put you to sleep in this episode because we're going to talk about fatigue management. We're going to talk about the toll it's taking on your organization, whether you realize it or not, and what you can do to combat the safety hazards associated with fatigue. I've got links in the show notes so that you can grab some of the resources that I refer to from the National Safety Council. A fantastic organization, a wealth of information, no affiliation whatsoever. This isn't, I'm not paid to say this. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, shape, or form. It's a great topic. And, a lot of folks struggle with how to deal with this, and they have some good resources. I have links to the National Safety Council pages and manuals that you can download and follow along, or you can use after you listen to this podcast. Now, fatigue and the safety implications, the negative effects, it's an important topic. I know that they have a fatigue awareness week each year, but, a week isn't enough. It's not enough. It's something that we should be focusing on year round as organizations. The emphasis that week is just that, is getting you started on implementing fatigue management as a staple of your safety management system, right? Of something that you manage regularly. So, keep that in mind. This impacts every single industry, not just construction, not manufacturing, transportation, aviation, obviously. You got some industries that put limits on how long folks can be at work, over-the-road drivers, pilots, things like that. So obviously it touches on every industry. Now, according to the National Safety Council, when workers don't, or people, I should say, not just workers, it goes, it touches off the job as well. But when people don't get the sleep they need, they're not able to physically or mentally function at optimal levels. So much so that routine tasks feel more demanding. Reaction times get a little slower, and people become, forgetful, make poor decisions, and just don't communicate or coordinate well with coworkers or family members for that matter. Many studies have found that, there's a connection between fatigue and increased risks on the job and in a wide range of work settings. Long work hours, working at night, rotating shifts, those are common. I used to see those all the time in manufacturing. Shift rotations. You work 2 weeks on shift, first shift, and then you switch to second shift and work 2 weeks. Then you switch to third shift and work 2 weeks. We're killing our workers with this stuff. It's not productive, and some of it's driven by collective bargaining. Some of it's maybe good intentions of we want everybody to have a turn at first and second shift. We want to make everything equal, and say you're causing some serious problems with that. Okay, and we'll get into the studies. We'll get into some of the biology a little bit about how long it takes your body to adjust from going from first shift to even second shift and disrupting that sleep pattern. How long it takes. It could take a good couple of weeks, and then boom, you're on to the next shift. So you're creating this just army of zombies, just perpetually in a funk, and we wonder why productivity and morale, things like that. And then you get into some, conflicts at work, workplace violence. You get mental health issues, wellness issues. Insurance costs, health insurance go up, claims go up and increase because, they develop problems that they thought weren't related to work and they're related to fatigue. All kinds of issues. We'll get into those. So we know there's a connection. We know I mentioned long hours and changing shifts and all that good stuff. But those are all factors that lead to the increased risk of errors and incidents, accidents, injuries, and reduction in productivity. I've seen accident reports where one of the questions, I saw this on the military side of the house, one of the questions is that has to be filled out is, when you last worked, when was your previous shift, and how many hours sleep did you get? Because they were aware of that. So, absenteeism, we know what that is, right? That represents a significant cost to organizations as a result of fatigue, and sleep loss is one of the leading causes of absenteeism, it turns out. But there's also something else. This is a new word for you. You're going to be able to throw in the dictionary. Presenteeism. Okay. It's significantly opposite, right, of absenteeism, but that's being at work, but not working effectively. It leads to reductions in productivity and quality and just efficiency, things like that. So presenteeism is you're there, but you're not all there. We've seen this. We've probably even joked about it, like I'm here in body, but not in mind, or I don't know, something like that. So this is a phenomenon that is present when fatigue comes into play. So let's talk about increased risk in errors. Now, people with sleep deficits are not as productive as they could be. We know that. They're also more prone to making mistakes and errors. So there's an estimated 274,000 insomnia-related workplace accidents and errors that occur yearly. And it's estimated that it costs U.S. employers more than, get this one, $31 billion with a B. $31 billion. That's more than any other chronic health-related condition. All right, did you get that? More than any other chronic health-related condition. Fatigue, just fatigue. Okay, so it's key. The safety side, we get that. But, you've got managers and supervisors, C-suite folks. Maybe they're not sold on this. I don't know. Maybe they are, or maybe you're looking for something else to throw on the pile to get some funding or some support behind this initiative for you at work. Throw in there the lost productivity, efficiency, increased waste in product and materials, quality is compromised. It's everything. It's not just safety. Obviously, it's important. Our safety is the most important thing, being able to do our jobs in a safe manner. But hey, look, whatever gets you there, throw it in the box and pack it up, present it, okay? So it can impact every aspect of the business. So incidents and crashes, right? There was a 2014 study. It estimated that up to 21% of all fatal vehicle crashes might involve a drowsy driver. Factors that contribute to such events include working multiple jobs. So folks taking up different jobs, different companies, working nights or other unusual schedules, getting less sleep than needed, and getting poor quality sleep when they do. That's also important. Long commutes add to longer waking days, and it actually cuts into the time available for sleep. Think about it. You get home, you still got to do the stuff you got to do at home, which means you get to sleep later. But you still got to get up early, right? All of this puts more workers at increased risk of, for driving while drowsy. Now, here's a pro tip for you. According to the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, 20% of accidents are related to fatigue, with 40% of highway crashes involving fatigued drivers. So take that little factoid that I gave to you, put that on an email signature or something, especially you in the transportation business, or if you have drivers, traveling salespeople, for a good couple of weeks, change your little signature. You've seen these quotes people have under their email signature and stuff like that. There's one that you can put on there. Look, get the word out, okay? Increase people's awareness for this type of hazard and start asking some questions about, the quality and length and type of sleep that folks are getting. And we'll get into some of that. Something else to consider. Fatigue culture is extremely difficult to overcome. A workplace culture that, rewards or even tolerates fatigue can be a factor that is driving its continuation. It can be hard to break. In some high-performance cultures, employees may view fatigue as a sign of weakness or laziness, right? You don't want to admit that you're tired. You don't want to be seen as somebody who's not willing to put in what it takes. And, I reread, this is the fourth time I've read this book called Rework, but there's a chapter that the founders of this company, wrote. They flat out said, fire chronic workaholics. They said, they were brutally honest about it. They said, one, they create problems. They work unnecessarily on things that don't need to be worked on. It's like, look, you make poor choices, poor decisions. Your head's not clear. You focus on the wrong things, when you're tired. Look, get some sleep, for goodness sake. And these were the founders of a $1 billion company. So we still have, I still see this, a culture of burning the midnight oil, burning the candle at both ends, right? Pulling all-nighters. It's almost like a rite of passage. No, it isn't, and it doesn't have to be. So check your culture. See if we're forced overtime. That's another one that I really don't understand. One, first of all, overtime is the least productive time, work shift, right? For workers. And it costs us the most. Okay. Forcing somebody to work overtime most of the time, more often than not, get you less production. So you get to this point of diminishing returns, right? You've just got to kind of weigh the cost of, cutting it off at 8 to 10 hours and then hitting a reset, getting back at it the next morning and doing it. And we get caught up in this, well, this is a hot order and, we got to get this out. We get, and why? Well, because we got to make our numbers look good. Why? Because, that's going to please the board. And it's like, okay, so your customers are the board, not the actual customers, right? Because I bet you most customers, the shipment date is going to probably be the same. If I get this out at 7 p.m. tonight, forcing somebody to stay 3 hours over versus getting it out at 9 in the morning tomorrow on the same truck that's going out that day. I don't know. Look, I know people are going to shake their head and go, Blaine, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. I've been in and out of manufacturing shops and, my entire career, construction. And I'm going to tell you right now, I love when I hear, we got a hot order. It's usually not that hot. If you got a hot order today, you're going to have a hot order tomorrow and you're going to have a hot order the next day. It's never going to go away. It's not. You're always going to have it. I say you got a problem with your processes, but employers may be incentivizing long hours, with financial benefits, promotions, and increasing and promoting this culture of burnout instead of managing fatigue as a potential safety hazard like other hazards we manage. So think of fatigue management as a part of your safety management system. We address workplace fatigue through the same types of safety management mechanisms that your organization uses for, overall safety, anything else. Such an approach would ideally apply multiple elements, recognizing that fatigue is a complex issue that can be minimized. So, getting started with a fatigue risk management system, what do we need to do? Well, fatigue management is a way to further enhance the current safety management system and can rely on many existing mechanisms. As a first step, you should make an effort to understand what fatigue risks actually exist. We talked about some of them, but consider, incremental components or comprehensive plans, right? Think about these. While a comprehensive fatigue management program may be the best approach, especially for, a big organization, test individual elements at first, okay? And see if they work. A first part, perhaps smaller in scope, can be implemented and evaluated easier than trying to build out an entire comprehensive program. So tackle one thing first and see what kind of results you get. Now, lessons learned can then be applied as the component is expanded upon, considering other activities you want to add or components you want to add to your program. Another thing you can do right off the bat, we're still talking early stages here, form a fatigue committee, all right, or rely on your safety committee. You don't have to call it a fatigue committee, but you could say, for the next 3 months, 4 months, or this quarter, we're going to focus on fatigue as a committee. That's going to be our focus, right? Designating, either an individual or individuals to head up this targeted approach is critical for its success, right? Somebody needs to own this. I encourage you to get others involved, right? The safety person, the safety manager has to still do everything else on a day-to-day basis. Get a partner that can focus on this with you. Okay. That's going to be important. So yeah, maybe it's a small committee that can oversee activities, gather and evaluate feedback, determine, which areas to focus our efforts. Now, having representatives from across the organization, like safety, operations, wellness, check with your HR and wellness and benefits team, getting their involvement will help ensure that, you are including different perspectives, and it gets you a lot closer to success. It also gets you something called buy-in, right? We use that term a lot. It's essential that the fatigue management process be transparent and that appropriate information is shared throughout the effort to obtain this needed buy-in from all levels of the organization. I mentioned managers, supervisors, and leaders. You can kind of make the business case for a fatigue management program, but you also want to be able to make the case to the rank and file and get their buy-in, their not just buy-in, but their involvement. You're going to need to recruit some folks to help you out with this effort. So you can definitely sell them on the benefits of a fatigue management program, but making sure you get multiple people involved across the organization, not just safety, that's going to help. That goes a long way. Now, let's get into identifying some risks associated with fatigue. I did mention some, but in addition to employee input, an audit or a survey of supervisors and managers can help determine where fatigue risks may exist or potentially could exist and provide an indication of, the severity. What's the magnitude of this risk, right? And is it real? You may have actual cases where fatigue was a contributing factor of either near misses, first aids, motor vehicle accidents, forklift accidents, whatever. So, dig into that data. If you have an EHS management system, a digital system, something like iReportSource, this may be easier for you to just be able to query and figure out, which motor vehicle accidents, how many did you have, which ones were related to, had causal factors like fatigue, stuff like that. But, gather this data and then also do this survey of supervisors, managers, workers, and try to get some sense of where fatigue risks also exist. It's going to tell you where you could focus your efforts. Now, for the initial activities, it's important to present some action in the near term. So anybody contributing, they feel that their input was looked at and incorporated. As a result, they're going to be more likely to be engaged, right, with the ongoing process and actions. That's how you get buy-in. I mean, imagine that. I should put this on a bumper sticker and sell millions, right? Listen to what somebody says and then act on it. It's just a crazy concept. You're hearing it here for the first time. It's going to be groundbreaking. I'm telling you right now, I'm going to get mugs, T-shirts. There's a whole merchandising plan I'm cooking up for this. But, it's crazy. Everyone talks about, how do I get buy-in? How do we increase buy-in? How do we, increase trust and engender trust? And how about actually asking, them what they think and then listening to them? All right. So the next thing you got to do is you got to act on that. And that's the step we're talking about here. So you can get some quick wins by getting their involvement and then acting on it. So that helps. Then, you could start to formulate some critical components of a fatigue risk management system or firms, right? FRMS, or whatever you want to call it. One is education and training. So again, critical components of a fatigue risk management system, education and training. Sleep health education is a vital element of any fatigue management effort. Different delivery mechanisms can be considered and should be used actually over a period of time as your program matures as a way to help keep the information fresh. So you're going to have things like the initial orientation, some refresher training, some huddle meetings, or so you're going to be able to mix it up and then sprinkle throughout their time at work going forward. They get this information reinforced, right, in bits and chunks that are digestible, and it feels more present, if you will, than this pump and dump where we just give everybody this training up front and then kick them out onto the shop floor or the job site, and then maybe at the end of the year they get a refresher and then boom, they're back out again. You want to have a sustained approach where they're getting it through different channels and different mediums, and it's going to stick better that way, okay? Now, depending on your resources available, expertise outside of the organization can be beneficial as well. Now, individuals are generally unreliable at recognizing the effects of fatigue, right, in themselves generally. Now, I usually can notice this, okay? And again, I only notice it when it's bad. So the question is, at what point did I start to drop off? Where's that delta, right? So at what point did I start to drop off to where I recognize, man, I'm just tired, I should quit? How long did I work in those conditions up to that point at risk is the question. That's that gray area that we're not real good at. Like I know my wife, my wife and I, she had surgery recently, went through, some health scare, and she's on the other side of it now and going to do well. So for 2 weeks I was off and had to get up throughout the night for medication to help her. She couldn't move a lot and things like that, shower her and, wash her hair and all the good stuff a good husband should be doing. The issue is, both of us anyway, we're just flat out tired. So we would go to sleep 2 hours, the alarm would go off for one round of medication. 4 hours later, alarm goes off for this different set of meds. And so it's like, we're getting some sleep, but it's not quality sleep, right? We never really get into that zone, right? That REM sleep that we really need to recharge our batteries. And man, we just felt like we'd been kicked around for the last, by, the fifth to sixth day. We were just done. I mean, I was useless. I couldn't have coherent thoughts. It was crazy. And I'm like, I'm glad I took 2 weeks off. If I could imagine what I would have been at work, it was terrible enough just being around the house trying to figure out what I had to do next. But look, we're generally not really good. Getting back to the podcast here, we're generally not really good at recognizing the effects of fatigue in ourselves. Developing a personal signs and symptoms checklist can be extremely valuable and provide a little structure mechanism for self-assessments for folks. So having a card at a workstation or a reference card or something like that is a good idea, right? So think about that. People should include ways in which fatigue affects them, such as yawning, being forgetful, and other things. And then track the number of hours of sleep in the past 24 hours, hours awake, and time of day. If multiple fatigue factors are present, then the individual should seek out countermeasures to boost alertness or maybe take time off. And we'll talk about some of those here in a minute. But getting back to our program, right? The actual program, some components, policies and practices. Clarify roles and expectations. Okay. A recognized internal point of contact with responsibility for fatigue management efforts. That should be a good first step towards practical implementation that you want to take. So make sure you identify who that is, somebody that somebody can go to that is experiencing some issues or has some questions. This individual should be responsible for managing communications about the program and coordinating all program activities. This fatigue champion, if you will, I'm using air quotes here, recognizes both the benefit to the organization and the employees' lives. I mean, they've got to be all in. This champion can provide an extra level of motivation and inspiration that can lead to exceptional fatigue management programs. Policies and practices for work periods, okay, is another aspect of this. Effective policies and practices for hours of work and rest should be, science-based and recognize the physiological need for sleep and circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms, that's this normal sleep-wake pattern that you get into. Humans tend to sleep at night, right? We're not nocturnal by nature. So even when you've been working the night shift for a long period of time, studies show that folks that typically sleep during the day and are up all night have more health problems. Statistically, it's just, it's one of those things. So, making sure that we recognize some of those things and that we consider those in our policies and procedures and practices. You should also take into consideration the type of work that needs to be done and understand the characteristics of your workforce. There's no one size fits all, the number of daily or weekly hours that you can work. Some folks are different. Okay. but making sure we take that into consideration, come up with some sound policies and procedures around, working hours and sleep hours and hours off. Daily and weekly limits could be something you look at. So daily fatigue risks, they increase with more hours on duty, we know that, or with more time on a task, like hours of work without a break. So both of those contribute to error and increase risk. So daily work limits should be addressed, and you should look at the impact of the hours awake, how factors such as commute times, shift start times, those affect the time workers are awake before the start of their work period. Not a lot of things folks consider. I've been in manufacturing plants where first shift starts at 7 a.m. So they got to be there at like 6:45 a.m. And some folks live 30 minutes away. You have to consider some of these things, all right? I'm not saying we're going to solve all the problems here, but it should be a point of consideration. Sleep loss throughout the work week also impairs performance. So setting weekly limits on the total work hours and including a provision for a weekly off-duty reset period, if you will, those are common ways that a lot of organizations seek to manage this cumulative effect of sleep loss over time. We call it sleep debt. Now, the intent of this reset day or days off is to allow workers to obtain that recovery sleep and be rested and ready for their next period of work days. Problem, you give people the weekend off to recuperate, and they're going on a weekend trip and they're up all night and, having a few too many, and then come back Monday all just wrecked. So look, we've got some shared responsibility, right? Us as workers, as employees, as well as the organization, the company, and managers to provide this information and some structure for us. So we've got to work together. So something else you want to consider, time of day fatigue. And again, this goes to the circadian rhythm, misalignment of that. Working at night and corresponding daytime sleep are both misaligned with the normal human circadian rhythms. It's just a fact. Fatigue risks increase during night shifts, and sleeping during the day is less than optimal due to that circadian clock, this biological clock that we have as people, as humans, okay? For those working a night shift, consider minimizing the monotonous or monitoring tasks that can, unmask underlying sleepiness. And say also safety sensitive duties should be scheduled earlier in the work shift when possible, because that's when you're most alert. Early morning shifts require employees to adjust their sleep schedules. I talked about that just a bit ago, but this might lead to, or could lead to, chronic sleep loss. They need employees to be alert when their bodies are still in sleep mode. So if you have to get people up at 5 a.m. or 4 a.m. just to get on the road, that's when their bodies are saying, hey, I should be sleeping right now, but they're forcing themselves to be awake. So getting to know your folks, where they live, how far they drive to work and commute, average commute time, things like that. I know it's going to get dicey and people are like, there's no way I'm going to ask every employee how long it takes for them to get to work. And I'm just saying, get to know your employees, understand their circumstances, and then look at how that may impact the start time, right? And when they have to get to work. Limits on night shifts, something else you might want to look at. With increased fatigue risks associated with, working at night, employers should consider implementing shorter night shifts. That's going to provide a way to minimize the interaction of risks related to the hours awake and the increased likelihood of fatigue during the low point of their circadian rhythm. So we're just trying to balance that, estimate when that rhythm, begins and ends, and try to shift things around. Fatigue risks have also been found to increase over consecutive night shifts. So minimizing multiple nights in a row and providing regular breaks should also be considered. I know a lot of this is going to fall on deaf ears out there, but look, as safety pros, we get this. We know this. We hear employees gripe about this. I'm still thinking back to a plant that had the rotating shifts. And I would go and visit this plant quite often as a consultant. And sometimes it was hit or miss as to if I would see the same group of people because they rotated shifts. And sometimes I would have to go in at 3 a.m. to catch the same group I saw last month to do some follow-up training and work with them because their shift rotated. And you wonder why everyone was grumpy. The plant was always dark, and it was nuts. I wanted to fall asleep. So look, we know it's a real thing, and we have to have this honest, frank conversation with management if we are going to, make any kind of strides in improving managing fatigue, right, as a safety risk. So we talked about limits on night shifts. Let's talk about early morning shifts. I mentioned this twice already. Early morning shift starts can infringe on the individual's regular sleep periods, right? Again, talking commutes, the wake time necessary for early shift starts. That could feel like it's the middle of the night for some people. Keep that in mind. Difficulty getting to bed earlier than our circadian clock's programming wants us to is a challenge in getting adequate sleep. So when folks get off and have to go drive home, and then they have dinner and then family time, and then they have to try to force themselves to go to sleep, they may be past that point. Have you ever, sidebar, have you ever heard or uttered this expression of, I'm too tired to go to sleep? You've passed that point where your body is like, forget it, You've kind of thrown off that rhythm. Everything's out of whack. It's like your body doesn't know what to do. You're sort of you're unconsciously conscious, right? You're there, but you're not quite there. That's what we're talking about there. So getting to bed, earlier than our circadian clock wants us to. There's also this going to bed past a certain time where it's almost futile. So the quality of your sleep is just completely messed up. In general, limiting limits on work hours in general can be a challenge for businesses. Flexibility is needed in many situations. Additional restrictions might be considered for anybody working irregular schedules. For example, limiting the number of on-call periods per week. Shift workers, another one, right? They're vulnerable because, non-traditional work schedules might require long shifts, non-daytime working hours, and then changing shifts. And shift workers are at higher risk of drowsy driving. I keep mentioning it. I talked about rotating shifts, but basically it's called shift work. Swing shifts is another one, right? So one shift working population that is at particular risk are medical workers. They can log more than 100 hours in a work week with very little sleep. I mentioned before we have a shared responsibility, right? So there's also something to consider here called fit for duty. It's a touchy subject. We're going to talk about it on the podcast, but I've been there. I have had some awkward conversations with managers, supervisors about this topic. And, in the fire department, we had a fit for duty protocol, police department, military as well. But in general industry, you got somebody who's really out of shape, hasn't taken good care of themselves for whatever reason. I'm not judging anybody. This is a judgment-free podcast, okay? Seriously. So you know what I'm talking about. I hope I can say these things without offending anybody out there. I'm saying them for a reason, and it is for this. That individual may not be as physically capable of performing some tasks as somebody else. And that variance could lead to some increased risk that we normally would not have to consider. So sleep, when we talk about all of this, arriving fit for duty is the responsibility of both the employer and the employee. Okay. Fatigue is in that category, is what I'm trying to get at. Okay. I have a responsibility to my employer and to my coworkers when I show up that I am fit. And that's not just physical. Okay. We're talking about in the context of getting enough sleep, not being sick, communicable, but that is, flu, cold, or whatever, not being of the right frame of mind, all that good stuff. We've got to help each other out. We have a shared responsibility for this. Employers should ensure that, workers have at least 12 hours off between shifts to get proper sleep. Employees are responsible for allocating their off-shift hours wisely, especially, if we're working a second job. That can get dicey. So how do we mitigate, fatigue? We talk about management. What about mitigation? Now, a workplace with positive environmental controls promotes better overall working conditions and should be less physically stressful in ways that contribute to fatigue on the job. There's plenty of jobs that are physically stressful, but we can manage some of that to mitigate some of the negative impacts. Factors like high temperatures, noise, excessive noise, vibration, those are leading drivers of occupational fatigue. And here we're talking about fatigue related to our tasks or our duty. Okay. So we show up okay, but then it's very stressful, lots of noise and vibration, and boom, we're just spent halfway into our shift. So environmental factors can play a role in an employee's accumulation of fatigue. So we know this. So things that can help, things you want to do to help promote alertness. Okay. Moderate temperature, bright lighting, because eye fatigue, eye strain can make you feel more drowsy. So bright lighting, clean air, quiet environment, also designated break areas that are separate from the work areas. That can be an essential tool for managing fatigue. You need to break that cycle of constantly being in that environment. I've been in shops where, you've got a welding booth and you turn and look to the left or the right, and there's a little table with a microwave, and they all eat right there. They work there. They never leave that area unless maybe they go to the bathroom. But, encourage folks to get out of that work area into a different lighting arrangement, air, sound, everything. Get out of that environment from time to time. Take those breaks. Get that downtime. It really does help. So break time in well-lit, moderately tempered areas with adequate ventilation, even fresh air, it can provide a really good opportunity to reset, for, those of us working in physical, stressful settings. Here's a pro tip. Caffeine. Oh man, I see so many energy drinks now, especially with the younger generation. Sorry, had to say that. But I never got into the Red Bulls and 3, 5, 12, 16-hour energies, whatever they're called. I never got into all that, but caffeine, it can provide a short-term boost to alertness when appropriately used. But rather than relying on caffeine throughout the shift, it's best to use it just before a critical work task or before the mid-afternoon period or midway period of your shift when sleepiness occurs. But, there's some myths and misconceptions about the use of caffeine out there. And I am not a doctor or physician or, somebody who specializes in that. It's just whatever research I've done and what I happen to know, especially what I know about my own body, right? But a cup of regular coffee with 100 to 200 milligrams of caffeine can boost alertness for potentially, this is in perfect conditions with the right person, up to 4 hours. It's got about 15 to 30 minutes needed to take effect. So time your cup of coffee right. And be cautious with sugar in coffee or other caffeinated beverages. A lot of these, energy drinks, they're not energy drinks. It's just jacked up with caffeine and it's just laden with sugar, which is going to actually do the opposite, right? It's going to reduce alertness and you're going to come down. You're going to crash. So your glycemic index spikes, right? When you just flood your body with sugar, then you're going to crash. Anyway, not to get into that, but there's a tip for you. Look, have some fact sheets about energy drinks. We did this at a couple of plants I worked at where we put out these alerts on energy drinks and what they actually do to your body and your mind. And it's not what you think it's doing. So look, in the end, data-driven programs and continuous improvement is what we need to be leaning on, okay? A fatigue management program provides the most value when it's data-driven and strives for constant improvement. Ask employees for their input. They can be a wealth of information. You need to ask and then listen and act on that, okay? I keep going back to that. What mitigation strategies work the best? Let's give you some more info here. According to the National Safety Council, employees may have valuable feedback on environmental conditions and the usability of like a break room, for example. You can ask what adds to your fatigue. Employees could say, can participate in annual surveys on their experiences and perspectives on fatigue-related matters. That's a great way to get a better understanding on where to start. What about low reporting levels? When folks are reporting low levels of hazards or concerns, or even on your surveys, look, there's something else going on. All right. Don't assume that, just because people aren't giving you feedback or reporting things that there aren't any issues. I always get concerned. My spidey senses are always tingling when, I go into a manufacturing facility with 3 shifts plus some weekend shifts, so like 5 different shifts, 400 people minimum, or even 200 to 300 people. And there's no hazards reported. Nobody has any issues. Nah, really? That's just statistically, that's just not possible. Okay. There's always stuff going on. We're always having to look out for it and keep things moving, fix things, find things, fix things, and keep them moving ahead. Look, it's a working plant, an industrial plant. Stuff's going to wear out. Things are going to happen. Things are going to get moved over into the aisle. Things are going to get shifted over here in front of this door. If nobody's reporting things, if you got low reporting, that's a red flag. Now, that doesn't mean stuff's always going wrong. Maybe you're doing a lot of inspections, right? And you're always on top of these things. But remember, those inspections should be finding things. So somewhere there's some feedback coming your way as to what's going on and how we fixed it. So if you have low reporting levels, maybe you want to look into that. Are your reporting and monitoring systems effective? Are they usable? I talk about this all the time about making things super simple, like what we do at iReportSource. We say it's a super simple way to kick paper to the curb, but there's a reason why we talk about that. Look, anytime you make it difficult for people to report something simple, they're just not going to do it. And it's important that you remove those barriers and obstacles. Even OSHA looks at this. Have you effectively removed as many barriers as possible? Now, they're not saying you got to go to a digital system. You got to take this system or process or approach over one or the other. They're just saying, in general, do you try to make it easy for employees to report hazards? And that's important. So, I'm working at a machine, and I notice there's a hazard or an issue or a concern. I've got to walk over to the crib. I've got to grab this form or card. I've got to come back over, fill it out, make a note of something, go and turn it into this box. Maybe I want to take a picture of it. So I take a picture, and then I got to walk over to my laptop or the computer or the workstation, and I want to upload it, or I want to send it to. It's just crazy. With apps and software, you should just be able to walk to the workstation, enter the concern, and be done, or use the app on your phone. I know a lot of companies still, say, hey, you can't have your phone on the floor because everyone's going to be, on Netflix all day. It's like, well, then you have a trust problem. I don't think the problem is the phone. I think the problem is setting clear expectations and holding your people, to meeting those expectations. And there's some shared responsibility there. But a lot of places have environments that aren't conducive to cell phones, and a lot of workers don't want to use their own phones at work. I get that. But, there are other ways. There's workstations at on the shop floor. There's kiosks you can set up to make it easy. But what that does is that digital workflow versus paper is it's instant. You instantly get a notification that there's an issue. There's no lag time. And the analogy I like to use is, imagine back in the day, you wanted to send a note to somebody. You would write it out, right? You would put it in an envelope. You would put a stamp on it, and you send it in a mail. Somebody would have to physically carry it to the other party, deliver it, and where it would be open and read. Now we send an email or we shoot them a text. It's instant, provided they're there and paying attention. But you get the point that, look, make it easy. Make sure that it's usable and they're not discouraged from reporting, right, by the use of some sort of layered paperwork process. And this isn't just me saying it. This is a National Safety Council says it, ISO says it, the whole foundation to an effective safety management system is sort of leaning this out, making it efficient. All right. Monitoring and reporting mechanisms, right? This has to allow your program champion and other safety managers to assess the levels of fatigue risk in the organization over time, even to identify trends and understand the issues that are being reported and need addressing. Incorporate reporting processes into your current procedures within an existing safety management system. So meaning if you have a way to report hazards and you have different categories like electrical, fire hazard, chemical hazard, near miss, add fatigue, maybe, So that's what the National Safety Council is referring to when they say that you should incorporate reporting processes into your current procedures within your existing safety management system. That's what they're talking about. You don't need to come up with something new. Just make sure that you're capturing fatigue as a potential risk in your current system. All right. So that's a good tip. Keep in mind that when implementing a program, low levels of reporting may indicate a lack of awareness of the program rather than a lack of fatigue-related issues in the workplace. So work really hard on your rollout. Make sure, and we do this at iReport. That's actually one of the, I'd say, indicators to success with iReport is, how good of a rollout we have, right? And companies that flub the rollout, brush it off, go, we'll do it, we'll get it, this is just going to be used by a couple of us. It's not going to be effective. The whole point is making it easy for everybody to report things and to capture this information. So, put a little emphasis on your rollout and make sure that people are aware of the presence of these processes, these systems, and how to use them. What about incident and accident investigations? I mentioned it earlier. The military is the first place that I saw this question on an accident report. But established incident and accident investigation processes should be expanded to include at least an evaluation of the potential role of fatigue, and generally, a combination of factors present at the time of the incident or the accident would indicate that fatigue did play a role, like the following. So you want to include this, okay? So include the following. Time on shift. All right, so more hours may increase the likelihood of fatigue. Time awake at the time of the event. When the hours awake exceeds 17, fatigue becomes more likely. So there's your benchmark. Length of the work week. More consecutive days or nights of work also lead to increased fatigue. Self-reported info on alertness. All right, use standard measures such as sleepiness scales to measure this, but allow those involved in the incident to self-report, their alertness. And you can get some cultural things going here, like people are I'm not going to admit I was tired. They're going to think they're at blame. That's not an individual problem. That's a culture problem. That's somebody who's, that's fear-based for whatever reason. Make sure you address that with your culture, especially with leadership and management, to say, hey, look, man, it is what it is. We need to know. Okay. We need to know so we can stop it and we can keep it from happening to you again or anybody else. Some of this stuff like self-scoring, it can be a little skewed in some places. So I get that. Also, self-reported info on sleep history, right? Investigations should attempt to gather info on prior sleep history to assess the influence of those previous factors. Alrighty, review and learn from your data. This goes to the continuous improvement piece, okay? We're getting close here, folks. I told you this is going to be a lengthy one because, it's so involved that, and that's why I'm going to send you with these links to get more information. Fatigue, it's one of these called the sleeper hazard, literally, but it is not as apparent as the unguarded machine. And I think personally, I've seen it impact industries, but I think it impacts us a heck of a lot more than we believe. So, incident and accident reports can be a valuable tool for the fatigue program manager Look for trends and in the types and sources of reported fatigue factors. So investigations can provide, some good lessons learned, right, that you can incorporate into any ongoing education and training activities. But, collecting data and applying lessons learned can be a challenge. With any organizational safety-related effort, it's important to seek ways to continue improving operations. So, monitoring and reporting information, along with any incident or accident investigation and reporting, it provides valuable info to you, the program manager, or somebody else you might appoint to this. What's working, what isn't, what can we do better? Employers should consider a regular internal audit or the use of an external evaluator to address any of these types of issues, what's working, what's not, and what can we do better, and to determine ways to further improve or expand your program. So National Safety Council has listed some fatigue management tools, right? Scheduling software. Some industries, for example, aviation, use programs that evaluate work schedules for potential fatigue risks as part of their fatigue management efforts. These programs, they use science-based algorithms. Sounds all sciencey, but it's their algorithms are related to factors such as sleep need, circadian disruption, hours awake, time of the day, and safety managers can evaluate work schedules for potential issues and then help the company implement strategies that will attempt to address the problems and minimize those risks. A basic risk assessment tool. All right. Factors include length and timing of work periods, time on task, workload, consecutive days or nights of work, variations in work schedules, and timing and duration of rest periods. You can create a simple checklist to randomly audit workers and to see, check for these things. So a risk assessment tool is an effective thing to use. All right. Other factors to consider include worksite environmental conditions, commute times, other potential stressors, such as critical deadlines. We talked about hot jobs, right? That's a good one. I got a hot job. Safety managers can similarly evaluate potential risks with this type of approach and determine interventions to minimize those risks. So be involved, get to understand what it is that drives the work that happens out on the floor. You have to be present to experience that. So that's key. Get out of the office. Look, I've said it before. I'll say it again. I don't care what you use. It just has to be effective. For me, iReportSource can do all this. As I often ask folks, if you aren't already using a digital EHS solution, what's the problem? Because yes, it's going to free up a lot of your time. It's going to actually allow you to be on the floor more. So use effective tools for this. Make sure that whatever you do, you're collecting data, you're able to actually develop trends. That data should tell you a story. You should be able to see some trends. So make sure it's doing the right job for you. So wrapping it all up, look, an integrated multi-element fatigue program is going to be the most beneficial. However, the implementation of incremental activities, one at a time, smaller chunks, it's going to be more feasible for the smaller companies or those with some limited resources. So don't bite off more than you can chew. Don't get overwhelmed. Pick one thing that you could start with that is realistic and achievable and go with that and test it out and see if you can work, right? So your minimum viable product, right? Your MVP, start small. Fatigue champions should also remain aware that change is difficult and it has to be managed with care. So highlight benefits for employees like quality of life, improved health, things like that. Transparency and shared information are essential in getting buy-in from all participants. Data-driven processes provide important empirical information on what issues exist within an organization and provide a framework for continued improvements to the program. I talked about that, so I'm not going to beat that drum anymore. I think you get it. But the National Safety Council, they are, no joke, right? They are leading the conversation on workplace fatigue, okay, in the U.S. Follow the various links in the show notes here for more information. So NIOSH has some tips as well. I listed those. So there's some really cool tips and resources for you, okay? So check out the show notes and let me know what you think. Make sure you look for me on LinkedIn. Reach out on LinkedIn. I want to connect with you on LinkedIn and have a conversation. And please, if you think about it, leave a rank and review on Apple Podcasts. And until the next Safety Pro Podcast episode, as always, be safe.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Safety Pro Podcast, powered by iReportSource, the all-in-one digital safety solution. For info on how you can request a free demo on all of the capabilities of iReportSource to streamline your business's safety management system, head over to thesafetypropodcast.com. We look forward to helping you manage safety on the next episode of the Safety Pro Podcast.